Hi, this is a lesson on the literature component for the Form 5 and it is on the novel Dear Mr. Kilmer. The focus for the lesson today is the characters in the novel. First, let's look at Richard Knight. He is the main character in this novel, Dear Mr. Kilmer. Richard Knight is 15 years old and he lived in Iowa. He was in the 10th grade. His physical description: he was tall, slender, and pale. He looked like his mother. Now let's look at the characteristics. Richard is loving, kind, and caring. Evidence: number one, he thought that animals should not be hunted down unnecessarily. He cried when his grandpa killed a deer when he was 8 years old. Number two, when he noticed Hannah was crying after school, he asked her what had happened as someone had scrawled the words "Dirty Hunt" on her book cover. Number three, Richard spoke up for some students who did not want to sign the card for Hannah. He told Mrs. Hansen that they wanted to sign but were afraid. Number four, Richard kept hoping that the war would end before Mr. Kilmer went to Europe. He was also worried that Gus might be killed in the war if he went after graduation. Next, Richard is also observant or perceptive. Evidence: number one, Richard realized that Angie sacrificed a lot for his family. She took care of them after their mother died when he was 7. Number two, Richard observed his father having a sad, haunted look whenever he gazed upon the prairie. He wondered what the father thought about. Next characteristic: Richard is also hardworking, diligent, or helpful. Evidence: 1. Richard did twice the amount of work on the farm than Gus did. 2. Richard helped his sister in the kitchen after supper. 3. In school, Richard worked hard and got excellent grades in studies. 4. When Richard got home from school, he did his chores, gathered the eggs, and pitched hay to the horses. 5. During summer, Richard spent his days on the farm plowing, planting, and cultivating. He also took care of animals. He loved working with his father. Richard is also strong, brave, and courageous. Evidence: 1. Abner and Harry warned Richard against signing the card for Hannah, but he bravely signed his name on it. 2. After class, Richard asked for the card from Mrs. Hansen so he could deliver it himself even though there was only one signature. 3. After school, Abner and Harry taunted him and started beating him, but he kicked Harry in the stomach and straddled across Abner. 4. After getting encouragement from Mr. Kilmer, Richard overcame his fear and informed his family of his love for writing poems. 5. After much encouragement from Mrs. Hansen, Richard read one of his poems in class and shared with them what Mr. Kilmer wrote. Next, Richard is also obedient or a filial son. Evidence: 1. Richard did not want to lie to his father regarding why he missed a shot, so he told his father the truth. 2. Richard felt guilty for disappointing his pa for not being able to shoot the deer. Next, Richard is also creative, talented, or intelligent. Evidence: 1. He wrote poems to express his feeling, but he locked them in his drawer to prevent anyone from knowing. 2. Richard came up with the idea of exchanging letters with the soldiers overseas so they would not feel lonely or homesick. Next, Richard is also thoughtful. Evidence: number 1. As Richard walked home from school, he talked about picking some flowers for his sister to put on the table. 2. Before Richard handed the card to Hannah, he wrote a kind message in it for Hannah and her parents. He apologized for what had happened and told them many people respected them and they were fine citizens. Richard is also sociable. Evidence: the first one is Richard had a famous poet, Joyce Kilmer, as a pen pal. Number 2, he exchanged a few letters with Mr. Kilmer when he was preparing for the war. Next, Richard is also hesitant or fearful. This is the opposite of the positive characteristics. Evidence number 1. Richard voiced his fear of telling people his love for poetry to Mr. Kilmer in his letter. He feared it would become worse for him. 2. Richard asked Mr. Kilmer for opinion on what to do regarding his poems. He wondered if he should tell others about it or hide it from them. 3. He was nervous when he stood in front of his classmates to read his poems. His hand was shaking and his voice quivered. The second character in the novel Dear Mr. Kilmer is Hannah Schroeder. Hannah is 50 years old and she lived in Iowa. She was in the 10th grade. Physical description: she is pretty, she's blue-eyed, and she has blonde hair like corn silk. Now let's look at the characteristics for Hannah. She is thankful or grateful. Evidence: after being unkind to Richard when Richard gave her the card, she apologized to him and praised him for being brave and kind. 2. She was thankful there were neighbors who helped to paint over the awful words on the wall of the tavern. They promised to prevent it from happening again. Hannah is also hopeful. Evidence: she wanted the war to end immediately as her brother Otto had joined the American Expeditionary Forces, American soldiers who went to Europe for war. She was worried about her brother Otto. She believed that people could live peacefully without wars if everyone could learn to wish peace in their own hearts, so fewer people would die in vain. Hannah is also patriotic. Evidence: she did not stop her brother from joining the American Expeditionary Forces, as her brother was patriotic and he claimed it was the right thing to do. Next, Hannah is also intelligent. Evidence number 1. She made a sensible suggestion to Richard on how to change the last line of his second poem he planned to send to Mr. Kilmer. Number 2. Through her essay, Hannah voiced her opinion regarding the war. She said peace must be made right in America. People must learn how to care for one another despite the differences. In the novel Dear Mr. Kilmer, another character is Mr. Knight, or Pa. Pa is Richard's father. He is also the younger brother of Roland, and he is a man of few words. Physical description: he is dark and brawny, he has a broad back, and he is tall built. Let's look at Pa characteristics. Pa is wise. Evidence: 1. As they followed the creek to a pool where deer often came to drink, they checked the direction of the wind and looked for a place to hide. 2. They placed themselves upwind of the pool so any deer that came to drink could not smell their presence. 3. Even though he felt sad killing animals, he understood that in order to keep on surviving, he had to hunt. Next, Pa is also understanding. The evidence: 1. When Richard missed shooting the deer, he justified by saying the deer was already bolting and Richard would not have made a clean kill. 2. When Richard voiced out his thoughts about not wanting to kill animals, Pa gave him permission not to hunt anymore. In addition, Pa is also analytical. Evidence: he could see that Richard purposely raised the rifle by a mere inch to avoid killing the buck. And he is also diligent. He is a diligent farmer like his father before him. He spent hours at his farm overseeing farm hands and tending to the cattle. Nonetheless, Pa also has negative characteristics. He is discouraging. Evidence: 1. When Richard told his father he wrote poetry, his father could not believe it. He asked if Richard were teasing him. Number 2. He did not want to listen to any of Richard's poetry, but reminded Richard not to let it interfere with his chores or schoolwork. Number 3. He expected Richard to outgrow writing poetry as he thought it was just a temporary interest. Let's now look at Gus Knight. Gus Knight is Richard's older brother, is the eldest child in the family. He is popular at school and he is a terrific athlete. Physical description. Gus Knight is dark and brawny, just like his pa. Let's look at Gus' characteristics. First, Gus is brave, merciless or determined. Evidence. Number 1. Gus killed his first buck when he was much younger than Richard. 2. He stated that he did not feel any guilt or sadness when he killed animals. Instead, it empowered him and made him feel like a man. 3. Gus wanted to join the army and fight for his country. Gus is also concerned or persuasive. After the shooting incident, Gus told Richard he had to learn to fit in with the other people as he was worried for him. He also advised Richard to get into sports so he would get into good shape. Gus persuaded Richard to try baseball as Richard had a strong throwing arm. Now let's look at Gus' negative characteristics. Gus is hot-headed or impulsive. Evidence. He was furious when Richard missed the shot and yelled at him without an ounce of patience. When Pa told him to return to the cabin to pack up, he showed his annoyance by stomping away. He is also stubborn. Gus refused to let his brother shoot the buck. He wanted to kill it himself, but his Pa sternly stopped him, so he had to comply. Discouraging. He claimed that Mr. Kilmer was wasting his time on a small fry like Richard. He mentioned he hated poetry and it was sissy stuff. He said he would deny Richard as his brother if he grew his hair long and curly. After dinner, he advised Richard not to go around school telling people he wrote poetry. He did not want Richard to pull another stunt like signing the card for the Schroemers and become an oddball. Let's look at Angie Knight. Angie Knight is Richard's older sister. She is dark and broadly built and slightly stout. Let's look at Angie's characteristic. First, Angie is responsible. Evidence. 1. She took over her mother's role after her mother died when she was 9. She spent her days storing and canning food, cooking, cleaning, washing clothes and sewing. 2. Angie also helped with the planting, harvesting and caring for the livestock on their farm. Angie is also filial or sacrificial. Evidence. Angie stopped school at 8th grade to help on the farm. She gave up her life to provide for her family. And Angie is also loving and patient. She understood past behavior as he had lost a brother and a wife. The next characters are Mr. and Mrs. Schroeder. Mr. Schroeder is Johann and Mrs. Schroeder is Frida. Characters. They are parents to Otto and Hannah. They are owner of Prairie House, a local tavern in Turtle Lake. They were originally from Germany but are American citizens. Physical description. Johann is large, cheerful man with mustache, and Frida is tall, slender. She styled her hair in braids. Hannah resembled her, and she is a good cook. Let's look at their characteristics. They are cultured. Evidence. Johann was a student at the University of Heidelberg. He enjoyed history, literature, and art, and also classical music. He is also well-traveled. He went to Berlin, Paris, London, New York, and Milwaukee. He is also friendly. He entertained Richard at their house and told him he was welcome to their house. Next, kind. Frida is kind because she prepared delicious dinner when Richard was her guest. She also prepared a picnic basket for the school picnic, and she knit a scarf for Mr. Kilmer. Mrs. Hansen. Mrs. Hansen is an English teacher and she wore bifocals. Mrs. Hansen is a responsible or creative person. Evidence 1. The school only English teacher who was strict but obviously cared a lot about what she was teaching. 2. At the beginning of the new school year, she announced that the class would put on a patriotic program to help sell Liberty bonds which helped finance the war. 3. 3. She suggested that the girl who won the best essay would play the role of Lady Liberty, while the boy with the best essay would be Doughboy. 4. She announced that she would post the two winners' essay in class for everyone to enjoy. Mrs. Hansen is also encouraging. Evidence 1. Despite the negative responses from her students, she encouraged them to sign a card for the Schroeders to show their sympathy. 2. Mrs. Hansen smiled encouragingly when Richard offered to send a card to the Schroeders. She praised him for having some integrity. 3. When she read Richard's poems, she had something nice to say about each one. She helped him choose one to send to Mr. Kilmer. 3. When she read Richard's poem, she had something nice to say about each one. She helped him choose one to send to Mr. Kilmer. 4. She encouraged Richard to share his poem with his class. Mrs. Hansen is also knowledgeable. Evidence: she informed the class that according to the New York Times, Mr. Kilmer had volunteered to fight in the war. She also told the class about other great poets who stood up for things they believed in, like Lord Byron and Walt Whitman, who both fought in wars. Mrs. Hansen is also concerned or kind. Evidence: when she heard that Hannah's parents' tavern was vandalized, she encouraged her class to sign a card for them to show their regret for the family. Second, when her students refused to sign the card, Mrs. Hansen defended Hannah's family, saying that they were upstanding members of the community and they had lived in the United States for many years. 3. She tried to get her students to sign the card but expressed her disappointment when Richard was the only one who signed it. Let's now look at the next character, Mr. Joyce Kilmer. Mr. Joyce Kilmer worked for the New York Times. He was a famous poet and he published a book, Trees and Other Poems. He was a father of 5 and a sergeant in the American Armed Forces. Let's look at Mr. Kilmer's characteristic. Mr. Kilmer was brave, courageous, or patriotic. Evidence: he volunteered for service in the army to fight for his country. He admitted it was very hard to train to be a soldier. Although he was afraid, he had to overcome his fears. He believed in President Wilson's calling of the war to end wars. He volunteered to fight so young men would not need to fight and die in many more wars. He was also caring or kind. He wrote poems about living things. And he was honest. He admitted his fear of going to war and his sadness that he could not be home for Christmas. Mr. Kilmer was also encouraging. There are many evidence for this. Number 1, he wrote to Richard and empathized with him. He encouraged Richard to be brave and to overcome his fears. He asked Richard to share his poems with those he knew. Number 2, he asked Richard to write to him again and send him one of his poems. 3. Mr. Kilmer signed his letter to Richard as your fellow poet. This shows he acknowledged Richard's ability to write poetry and could identify with him. 4. Mr. Kilmer told Richard his poems were very fine and impressive. He encouraged him to continue writing as he might become a published verse maker in future. 5. He claimed he enjoyed reading Richard's poems and letters. Another teacher in the school is Mr. Hickman. Mr. Hickman is Richard's history teacher. Let's look at Mr. Hicksby's characteristic. He is knowledgeable. He corrected the students' misconceptions about the Germans and the Huns. He explained that they were two different groups of people. He is also patriotic. He kept his students updated with the latest news about the war. Let's look at Richard's classmates. Abner, Louis, and Harry Harver. They are Richard's classmates and they are troublemakers. These are the negative characteristics of both of them. First, they are proud. Evidence: when Abner first heard Mr. Kilmer's poem, he said it was sissy stuff and claimed his father said poetry was for sissies, but he did not know that several poets fought in battlefields. Next, they also mean, unkind, or prejudiced. Abner and his friend wrote Dirty Hunt on Hannah's book cover. He also claimed that they were Germans. Harry said that the Shermans served sauerkraut in the tavern and it proved that they were unpatriotic as the war was ongoing. And they were cowards. They tried to bully Richard, but Richard retaliated. Abner begged Richard not to hit him. Next, there is Blanche Freeboot. She was classmate with Richard and her parents owned a grocery store. She is dark-haired. She has some negative characteristics: mean, unkind, ignorant, prejudiced. Evidence: she declared that Germans were barbarians who had to be stopped or they would take over the world and they cut people in two. She heard the Shermans spoke in German and thought they might be plotting something and did not want their neighbors to know. Next, Peggy Mason. She is Richard's classmate and she was interested in the role of Lady Liberty. Physical description: she is also dark-haired. Peggy has some negative characteristics like snobbish. She felt Millie was too mousy and bad-looking to play the role of Lady Liberty. She was also narrow-minded because she felt that Hannah Schirmer would be a mockery to the patriotic idea if she were chosen, as she was viewed as a Hunt. Other classmates like Mildred Millie Wright and Herbie Winkiski. Characters: they were classmates with Richard, and then they were chosen to play Lady Liberty and the Doughboy. Let's look at their characteristics. Timid. Evidence: they were intimidated by Abner, Blanche, and other popular students. They were not supportive of Richard and Hannah. We have come to the end on our discussion for the characters in Dear Mr. Kilmer. I hope you will benefit from this video, and then best of luck in your coming exam. That's all. Thank you, and signing off, I'm Teacher Gan. Bye bye.